So we need to go.
I think we're going.
Yeah, we're here. We're here
All right.
alone at this moment, but we can still welcome people, at least those that will join us. At the recording, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, welcome everyone.
Hey.
Nice to see you. My name is Philip. I'm Cyprus ambassador. I and what I do, I write blogs, do content and stuff like that. And yeah, that's me. You can find more about me either on my Twitter or LinkedIn, or ideally on my homepage, philipinese.com. And yeah, and that's about it. Uh,
Yeah. All right. Mike
Mike,
Cataldo.
you can introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah. Mike Cataldo from Lattice. I'm a senior estet there, and I'm also a Cypress ambassador and ex-Cypress engineer. And yeah, been been in love with Cypress for a long time, long time, and excited excited to have this podcast. This is what, episode 5, 4?
Four. It's episode four. Tell me about the ambassador thing, because I know you were an ambassador, then you became an employee, and now you're saying you're
Mm-hmm.
ambassador, so you're ambassador again, or was there any update? Because we talked about this, and I was wondering.
Yeah, I I'm calling myself an ambassador whether it's official
Oh,
or
okay.
not. So, um, I
I
mean, I
mean, I
think at
think
one
you
point.
can. You're doing a great job of talking about Cyprus. So I think you earned that title, whether you have it officially
Yeah,
or not.
yeah. Well, when I became an engineer there, I was taken off the ambassador page and put on the employee page. So I assume uh, when I left that yeah that I just wasn't put back on there, and I don't
Yeah,
need a page to tell me I'm an ambassador. So
yeah. I
just like you
don't think
don't
you need.
need,
Yeah.
with software engineering, right? Like I've seen articles about, people saying like you don't need somebody to tell you you're a developer. Like you're a
Mhm.
developer if based on what you do and your merit, not necessarily the title that other people give you, right?
I think
So
you're right about that. And yeah, as I said, I think you're doing a good job of being an ambassador. So yeah, why put a title in that? But let me check with the ambassador team. I think you should be an official part of that as well. I
sure,
don't think there's a reason for you not to be there. So
yeah,
we can do that. So sorry, that was a little bit of sidetrack because I got curious about your introduction.
of
Uh,
course.
yeah, one thing we have now, sort of a novelty for this stream, is, and you can see that in like the lower part of our screen, is that
The
you can
Slido.
join through Slido. Oh, I made a typo. It's SLDO. What the heck? Sorry about that. That should be Slido. Can't even uh, write the company I'm working for. Apparently.
I just
So
assumed that
there it is.
that was a
Like a short.
shorthand or something like that.
Yeah, that would be nice, but no, it was a typo. So sorry for that. So yeah, you can join through Slido if you go to that page and hit the code that's called code review. Then you will be in, and you can ask a question. We can sort of make this more interactive and try to answer your question as soon as we can.
Yeah,
If yeah, I think we can streamline questions in there, but I think we are taking a look at the chat as well. But if
yeah,
you, yeah, but we encourage you to use Slido. That's what I'm trying to say.
yeah, and not just in this live stream. Like if you're watching this as a recording, like go into Slido, ask questions, because or if you see questions in there that you want us to answer in the next episode, go ahead and upvote that, right? Because we want to. We're always looking for new content. No, I shouldn't say that. We want you. We want to look for content from you, but we also have like tons of things we love to talk about. But we want to
Yeah.
talk about things that you want to talk about, that you the viewer want us to talk about. So, and
Yeah.
this is also the code review podcast for a reason, right? We want to review your code. So, maybe Philip, you can add the, if it's not in there in the description of the video or in the chat, you can add a link to your Discord so that
Uh,
folks can ask
yeah, I
questions
can add
there or
that.
link to code to
Yeah,
review.
I can add that as well. So we can sort of uh, scroll through those messages.
Is there a code review channel?
Yes, yes, there is. That's actually
Good.
one of the channels you can sort of take a look into and submit your code, and the first round of review actually happens there. So yeah, that's also something that can be useful for you. Uh, all right then. Let's should we continue? Let's start with the news.
Let's go. Yeah, the
All
news.
right.
What's new in Cyprus? 10 point. What are we at now? 3, 2.
10.3.1. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, yeah, that's the version. Let me share the screen so we can take a look at it. So that's the screen number 2, and here it is. Let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see it as well. All right, yeah. So version 10.3.1, that was sort of a patch version, so not too much magic happening there, but mostly like bug fixes and stuff like that. But version 10.3 brought us a new feature, and that was the Cypress dashboard test data is now available within Cypress. So Cypress team is sort of taking moving that dashboard experience closer to the core application. So even if you're working on the open, the interactive mode, you're connected to the dashboard and you can see which one of your tests is the, I guess, the slowest one, how much it is failing or passing. Basically, there's a nice communication from the dashboard to your application, which is nice. They even made a blog post about this, so that's a really nice thing Cypress team started doing, to like release a blog post, and this is what it looks like. We missed the beginning of the of the video, but basically in your Cypress app there would be this nice little icon. Here it is, and you can sort of see what's how your test is performing on the dashboard, and clicking on it will take you right into the details, to the analytics, and there you can examine what's happening with that. I think that's a pretty neat feature. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I mean, I have, like we showed last time, like I have the Cypress app, the dashboard app, just installed it as a like a browser shortcut or browser app. So it's down in my Mac bar, and that it I think having it right inside the runner is just that much easier. I think obviously it's good for Cypress, because now folks are going to be more. It's more cohesive now, right? With, I mean, even with 10, but this makes it another step further in terms of cohesiveness between the dashboard and the runner, as opposed to being two separate things. And so it's good for Cypress, I was going to say, because folks are going to be wanting to upgrade, I'm sure, because they're going to see that benefit more. 'Cause it's going to be more in your face. But it's well worth it. Yeah, we're not sponsored by Cypress,
Not
right?
yet.
Not not yet. But
Not yet. We'll see how that goes, but
we're just
not yet.
crazy about Cypress. So if we say, if we say it's good, it's good. we mean it.
Yeah, I think we talked about the dashboard and what it brings. I think it was last podcast or the one before that. So I guess there's no point on trying to sell that one again. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you are not using dashboard, even though we're not sponsored, I would recommend to use it because it's really neat. It's especially the analytics part where you can sort of have like a top-down view of all of your tests and um, and how they're
Yeah.
performing, how the whole test suite, whether it is going fast or going slow. I think that's really useful for you um, if you want to, yeah, like work in the long term with your test, which I believe you want. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's about it for the news, right?
Yeah.
Or was there
Yeah. I think
something you
that's it.
wanted to add? I didn't notice anything that
No.
would be like very um, uh, prominent in the release. And since we last met, that was last month. Cyprus did go on a vacation, and they had one release. So I guess that's basically it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. While we don't talk about patch updates, they're still important, and they demonstrate the Cypress team's ability to keep things running. Obviously, when you're
Yeah.
going to have a new major version, there's going to be some hiccups. There's going to be things that are found that they don't realize until it gets to the masses. And so seeing those patch releases are, despite being a lot of little things, for certain individuals, they're really important. So
Mhm.
it's good to see that they're keeping after that.
We got a question about the dashboard, whether we are using parallelism for dashboard and especially like the grouping feature and parallel features. So I don't know about you, Mike, but I haven't been using the groups uh, a whole lot. Probably like never. I
Yeah.
have been using tags to sort of. They've been really useful to like tag different runs in the dashboard and say like, all right, this is
Mm-hmm.
the staging area. This is like pre-production area, and we would have all these different areas that we would use tags for to like show up and filter and everything. But groups, not so much. And I think the intention is like, all right, you have one pipeline and you have different phases of that pipeline, and maybe you want to run just a smoke test at the beginning, and then after the release, you want to like do a sanity check after you have released and
Mm-hmm.
run that on production. I guess that was the logic, but I never really got to that. Never really got to the grouping of your test or like desktop and mobile or different browsers or stuff like that. Never did that. I think it has the potential, but I guess didn't thought about it as useful. What was your
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah. I haven't used the grouping feature either. I can see it being a benefit for some. Like, for example, if you do cross browser testing, that can be really helpful because now you can group tests by browser. That's one thing. With the example that you gave with like running like smoke tests first and things like that, um, w- I don't do it for that because I run smoke tests against feature branches, and then I run the full suite just like on a nightly basis. Um,
How about the
but I
parallel
do use
running?
tagging. Parallel, yeah, definitely. And I use the smart orchestration. So with the dashboard, if you're not familiar with smart orchestration, with let's just say you have Circle CI, right? That's what I'm using, and you want to speed up your runs. Well, you can in the config you can indicate parallelism and a number,
Mhm.
and that number is the number of nodes, um, and they're isolated number of environments where you're running tests in parallel. And what happens in Cypress is when you say you select an arbitrary number like 4, it'll actually tell you if you increase this number by by one more, go from 4 to 5, it'll increase or it'll decrease the runtime by this amount. And the reason why you
Yeah.
want to balance that out, like you don't want to necessarily do like say 100 it because that's additional cost, and if you don't want to incur that additional cost, um, you want to reduce that number, but to the point where not to the point where your tests aren't running as quickly as they could. So say if you wanted to add one more, and that's 20%, but you save 50% in your runtime, then that can
Yeah.
make it worth it. So I use smart orchestration a lot. In fact, as our suite grows, I'm going to need to increase that number of nodes. I'm sure, or rather, there's going to be more value in increasing that number of nodes from say 4 to 5. Yeah.
I thought that more is better. So like spin up 100 machines and just run it, right?
As far as where we go, we spend a lot of money. Laz spends a lot of money on CI and just DevOps resources in general. So we're trying to rein that back in terms of costs, and that's one of the ways that you can
Yeah.
do it. So
Yeah, I guess that's a sensible thing to do. All right. I hopefully that answers your question, Kadir. But yeah, shoot away, either in the chat or in the Slido. Um, so yeah, we got a little sidetracked there with the question, but I think it was a very good question, and thank you for opening that. But we got some topics for today, right? Uh,
yeah,
I lost my notes. Do you have the notes that we
yeah,
discussed yesterday?
yeah.
Because I think I just opened Apple Notes and then I deleted that or something. I don't know what we are supposed to be talking about. I forgot all the topics.
So we were going to talk about black box testing, right? We were
Oh
going to
yeah.
define black box testing. So um, why don't you first define it, and then we can talk about what that has to do with Cypress
Mhm.
and how it's not a good tool for that.
Yeah. So the baseline, the opinion that I wanted to share is that I think Cypress is not a good tool if you want to do black box testing. So what that means? What is a black box testing? Basically, um, if you are testing, black box testing is when you are testing your application and don't really care about the code that is inside the application. You're basically blind to the code, to the technology, to whatever is happening inside the application. You're trying to test it as a user, yeah, as a user would. So you can go to different kinds of extremes with that, but the goal of your testing is trying to create a script that will emulate the behavior of the browser. So for example, an e-commerce store, you might want to test something like opening 20 tabs, right? And adding items into your cart and refreshing, going back and forth, etc. This might be maybe like way too complicated for an automated check, but but it could be right. You maybe have an obscure case that you want to automate and do something like that. So that would be the black box testing approach. On the other side of that, I don't think that's technically a term like white box testing, but basically the more white the box gets, the more insight you have into the code. And I believe that I think that's even mentioned in the documentation that Cypress is not really like a general purpose automation tool. So it's not really for automating browser; it's for automating the actions uh, on your application. Uh, So for that reason, uh, I think if you want to behave like a user, you might get into some trouble. Especially, I mentioned it, multiple tabs, right? Cypress doesn't have multiple tab support. In my opinion, it doesn't need it, and the reason why I have that opinion is that when I was testing, or whenever I was testing the applications that I was testing, um, in basically in every case where an application would open another tab, that case would be testable. It would be very much testable. There would be no problem with basically avoiding opening that new tab, because a new tab, you can imagine it like a totally new browser being opened. So if you got two browsers or two tabs or two whatever instances of your application, they either communicate through cookies or server or WebSockets, or there is some kind of connection between your instances of the application. And this is an example of knowledge you kind of need to have in order to feel safe with your test automation, because you
Yeah.
might think like from a user perspective, but hey, how am I supposed to test my application if I'm not able to open multiple tabs? uh,
Yeah.
well, you can do a pretty good job of testing that without needing to do that. And that's kind of my point that I'm trying to make, because there might be reasons for you to take on the black box testing journey, uh, and and if you are insisting on taking this testing strategy, I think that might be a little bit problematic when trying to use Cypress, because it has been historically it has been sort of a developer tool to, like, you have your unit tests or maybe some component tests or whatnot, and then you will add on top of that, you will add some end-to-end tests. So it's not really like coming from the browser scripting side of things. It's more like from, all right, I'm creating the code and I want to test it side of things. So yeah, but let me know what you think, either in the chat, but also you, Mike.
Yeah.
Do you think I'm
Yeah. I
wrong
wanted to
with
get
the black box testing and Cypress not being a good tool for that, or?
no, I think you're right on the money. I think to I wanted to provide an example. So let's just say that I don't want to provide the login. I don't want to use login as an example because I feel like that's kind of overused, and it's not super helpful. But let's just say that that you have like a wizard of some kind. Okay, so you have some kind of user flow that you're going through, um, adding some uh, adding something to a cart and checking out, right?
Mhm.
So if you're thinking about it from a black box perspective, in other words, just strictly from the user, you have no idea what's happening under the hood. What you're what you're going to do is go through that process of um, adding a product to the cart, and then maybe navigating to the cart and going through the checkout process, right?
Mhm.
But with white box, on the other hand, or rather just understanding what's actually happening from like an API request standpoint, and that can be done pretty easily just by opening, dev tools and inspecting the network traffic. By understanding that, you can see, okay, if I wanted to just test the checkout part and not necessarily adding something to the cart, maybe you have another test for adding something to the cart, right? Well, um, in the spirit of white box, let's look at what's actually being done in the back end to, or what requests are being made to add an item to the cart. And it may be some, like cart endpoint or something like that, right? So what do we do with that? Well, now we can create a test that, like in a before hook, will make that request as if a user had already done that. And then the interaction through the UI is
Yeah, you
just
can.
happening in the checkout piece,
Yeah, you can skip
right?
the UI in your UI test.
Yeah. So what's the benefit of that? Well, now you have a test that doesn't duplicate action, right? Doesn't duplicate action and runs faster. And in my opinion, um, end to end is kind of an unnecessary evil, and a lot of the flakiness comes from interacting with the UI. So if you can avoid that, do that as much as possible. Now you might say, well, now we're not really doing this as a user would, right?
Hmm.
That this is not pure end to end if we do that. And while that's true, you also have to look at it from a risk standpoint. In other words, if you do have a test that tests that entire flow, and as you scale, you're using that same, pattern. Well, now you have a lot of tests that are running really slow and more likely to flake. Is it worth the additional risk? In other words, are you actually finding bugs because you're not doing it as a user would?
Yeah.
And if the answer is most likely not, then then that you're doing it right, and that you're properly balancing risk. So anytime you interact with the UI, it should be looked at as an ROI, right?
Yeah,
So
you try
is
to.
the thing that I'm
Yeah.
doing actually giving me value? Because
Yeah, yeah.
otherwise, I don't want to do it.
You're trying to find that equilibrium between like the amount of work you spend on creating and maintaining that test with the amount of risk that
Yep.
is over your head or over your business if that certain thing will not work. Because not sure if how is it over at Lattice and with bugs, but in Slider we never really had like a zero bugs policy, because that's basically just not how the software works. If
It's not
there's
realistic, right?
this, I'm sorry,
It's not realistic.
it's not
A
realistic.
zero
There's this
bugs
joke
policy.
that if you write 10 lines of code, it's going to have 20 bugs in it. So if you don't want to have bugs, write no code. That's going to help. But but yeah, like even the word bug is sort of hard to define sometimes whether something is a bug or a feature, because it builds something as a feature and users don't like it. They consider that to be flawed thing, right?
Yeah.
And some of the things that are obvious missteps on either like testing or developing side, like I don't know, button is not centered well or something like that. That might be a bug in the eyes of a tester, which it objectively is. But does it really bother the user? If it doesn't, then I would argue maybe it's not even a bug because who defines quality, right? I'm really like the fan, really a big fan of the idea that uh, the quality is defined by user. They either pay by for your product or they don't. So if they're not really
Mm-hmm.
bothered by that not centered button, then you should ask yourself, is it worth spending the expensive developer time on fixing it? Uh, and you
Yep.
probably will because it's an eyesore and you don't want to look at it. But
Yep.
you could argue how much value you added to the user.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that if your product actually has value, then you don't have to worry about every single bug. I'm sure that there are tools that you use that you or your company pays for, and you run into problems. But
Yeah.
you're fine with it. It's not perfect, but you're okay with it because overall it's providing you value.
Yeah.
And that's what's important. So
Yeah, I guess
cool.
that's really really great way to put it. Because yeah, at the end, really the user will decide. And then there's difference between different bugs, right? I heard a story like Windows XP that was like most successful Windows of them all had. I don't want to. I don't remember the number, but it had like thousands of bugs when it was shipped for the for the initial release, and you really only need one to break everything. But at the same time, you can have a situation where you have thousands of them and still have a successful product. So I guess that's taking that lens. I really liked what you said about the risk, like and the return of investment. Taking that kind of perspective. All right, how much of a risk is this? I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, and I think from a PR perspective, right? Like I have this one feature and one test. It's really difficult to see that ROI. Like, who cares? I'm adding this additional test. Who cares?
Yeah,
But when you back up and you see the whole suite and all of the things that you're doing, then you can kind of see, okay, I see some patterns where we're testing things that we don't really need to do. We're testing things in an end to end perspective that we should be testing at a component level, like maybe testing the style of something, or that this, that this component works as we expect it, when it
yeah,
should be really tested in isolation, not in every instance where it appears, right? So, yeah, and so it's important to look at that. In my role as an estet, um, I am reviewing PRs and looking with that lens, um, of ROI. But eventually, I want to get to a point where our whole team is on board with that. And I think that'll happen as we continue to identify patterns that work and look at and gather data on the types of bugs that are coming in, and what kinds of things we're missing and not missing, as a result. Um, that'll come, but yeah.
yeah. Sorry, I think I got distracted by something behind me. Uh, I guess it was a bug. All right then. So let me like circle back to the initial question of Cypress uh, being a good or bad tool for the kind of black box approach. If we can like wrap it up, I'd say that you sort of agree with that, and that. You might I think you might have even added that the black box testing might in general even might not be the best approach for you.
From a purity perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I mean, even, yeah, I think that if you want to say like pure black box or pure end to end,
Hmm.
I don't think that any tool is really like, I don't think that even that approach is wise, Cypress or not.
Hmm.
I don't know if of at least, for tech companies that want a scalable, you know, uh, that have a scalable product that they want to test,
Hmm.
like we do. Yeah, that's just not the way to go. You have to you have to understand what, yeah, like what your risks are and how the application works under the hood in order to, um, get the
No.
most out of your tests.
Yeah, yeah, to test effectively.
Yep. Yep. Right on.
uh, all right, I guess
Cool.
we kind of filled this topic, but anyone in the chat, feel free to add your opinion to this, and like what's your experience with with black box testing. Were you ever considering that, or were you doing black box testing maybe without even knowing it, as like an instinctive approach to testing? Whether you then like shifted left to sort of open that box and try to look into what's happening in there, uh,
Yeah.
or not. Yeah, we'd love to hear the opinion. Um, all right,
Cool.
so what's you got the notes? So you tell me
Yeah, let's move
what's
on.
next.
So we had a question from, I believe it was Discord, about what are the most difficult things to understand with
Oh
Cypress,
yeah,
and what are the biggest challenges. And one of the things that we agree as we prepared for this, and don't think we really prepare very much because we don't we kind of go,
no,
we
it's
kind of
mostly
keep
like
this
10 minutes
casual.
of planning and 30 minutes of talking.
Yep, exactly. That's how it is. That's why we have a podcast, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah. So as we prepared, we talked about variables and chaining, um, and I also think the having the two contexts of the node with plugins and the browser context. I think that that can be somewhat confusing for some folks. So why don't we start with talking about variables and aliasing and things like that, and oh, and chaining. I guess they're kind of related, but we can kind of talk about those. Should we bring up like uh, VS Code and
yeah, I can
or
I
should we
can
do
do
that?
that. I can actually show you a chapter from my workshop. Let me just spin this up really quickly. NPM start. Uh, Here, I'm sharing my screen, and let me open up the test the Cypress. I'm not sure how well is that visible. Hopefully, it's visible enough. Um, but let's open up Cypress and go variables. And if anyone from the current workshop is watching, you can basically sleep on this chapter because I'm going to explain it now. So yeah, here I have an example where I'm creating. I have two requests here, so I can even draw. So I have two requests, right? So request number one and request number two. And the first one goes for API boards, and the second one goes from API lists. So I have this Trello application where you would create a board, and inside the board, you can imagine it like a real board, which you put on wall, and then have a list inside there. So in order to create list, you need to assign it to a certain board. So you would always have a board ID. So what's happening in this test? I'm creating my board, doing that with a request, assign it a name. So that's what this object over here stands for. And then I'm taking the response body and using that an ID attribute from that body. So basically, uh, this body goes over here. All right. So what I need to do is I need to use this then function. Basically, if I want to use a variable or use something from this first request, I need to include it in the command chain. And we'll get back to that. Um, but the reason I need to do that, or the reason what I see how people often start with this is they want to use the variable right from this response body. So what they often do is they create a variable like this, so const,
Const, yep.
and I'm going to call it board ID, or not const. It's going to be let because we are going to reassign it. Then Inside the then function, they're going to do board ID and assign that with the with the body ID. So they're going to take from this body and assign it to this board ID variable right over here. Uh, and then use that board ID in here inside the request. So of course, what ends up happening is that you get an error, and the error from the API, there's a message coming. You need to provide board ID in the request body. That's like the server talking to us that you need to provide the board ID. So it seems
Because
like
it's undefined, right?
yeah, we
It's
didn't define
undefined.
it. So if we take a look into here, like what were we sending? So here is the body. We are sending name new list. So that's over here, and the board ID is nowhere to be seen. So it was undefined. So people that are already working with Cypress already understand what's going on. But I like to demonstrate what's going on by using a couple of console logs. So let me add them. So let's do console log number 1, and I'm going to go number 1, and then just do plus board ID. And then I'm going to add another one over here. That's going to be number 2. And then right after the request, I'm going to, or before the request, let's add it before the request. I'm going to do console log number 3. So before I save that test, I'm going to open the console. I'll save the test and look into the console what's happening. So 2 things are happening. So we got our console log number 1, and the board ID over here is undefined, as it should be, because we just defined it and didn't assign anything to that. But
Yep.
what's interesting, the second log is number 3. So it's this one. And it's undefined. So, and then finally, we get the second log that's over here. And that is actually assigned with the number of 5. So that's the body ID has a number of 5. If I were to run it again, then it would be number 6. That's how the application works.
Yep.
So yeah, here we end up with all of this mess. So what's actually happening here is it's often described like, all right, so the Cypress code is asynchronous, and you are mixing it with synchronous code. And honestly, this wording has never helped me to to understand it. I think you can swap synchronous and asynchronous with blocking and non-blocking code. So every Cypress command is non-blocking, meaning that it sort of gets just read by the compiler, and it will get queued up to be executed at the right time. And the right time
Yep.
for Cypress test is when browser opens and executes one command after the other. The synchronous code or blocking would be everything else that's not a Cypress command. In this example, right? So the let board ID is blocking. So as the variable is declared and being assigned with a name or with the value, there's nothing else happening. So basically, let board ID is going to happen. Then console log is going to happen. Then our request is going to be read and queued up. So how about
Yep.
we take this CUI request, and when the browser opens, we are going to execute it. And then we have our then function. So again, that's a Cypress command. So let's take it to the browser, and it will get executed after browser opens and after the request gets finished.
Yep.
So that leaves us with this code being executed after the request, and then function uh, happens in the browser, right? So we kind of have to wait for that, for the browser to be opened and this code being executed. So what happens next? We're still reading the code, right? Console log is going to happen. That's going to happen immediately. So this is going to get executed before this happens,
Yep.
because Cypress will take a look into our code. It's going to compile it and inject it into our browser. So while this is happening, we're still running the test. We're still just bundling all of that code and trying to inject that to the browser. So what happens with the request finally? Again, take this with all of its arguments and execute it once the browser opens and once all of the commands are ready to be executed. So that leaves us with the board ID being undefined at the moment of the before we open the browser. Uh, was that clear? Did I explain that well? Or was it too much information?
Yeah.
You can give me feedback because that's kind of how I do that on my workshops.
Yeah, I think another way to say it too is like with blocking versus non-blocking. I think it's like if it starts with psi, or
Hmm.
if it's starts with dot and it's it's a command, it's going to be queued up.
Yeah,
So if you're looking at your test, go through look at everything that is not a psi, a psi request, or I mean, I suppose it could be a function, and then that you're invoking, and within that you have some psi command. So there's that too.
yeah,
But otherwise, look at everything that's not Cypress, not psi dot or dot, and go through that in order, and that's what you're going to see first, and then go back to the top and go through in with each command, and that's what you're going to see next. And that's why
yeah,
you see 1 3 1 3 2.
yeah.
That's basically what you said. I just said it in a different way. But can you
I like
share
the way
the
you say it. It's a good thing to remember. So like if it's a request, if it's a Cypress command, so if it starts with CY, then yeah, it's going to get queued up. Everything else is going to get executed immediately. So yeah,
Yep.
the whole
Yep.
then command with everything inside it is going to get queued up. So that's why it doesn't get executed um, in time for this board ID to be assigned.
Are you able to share your share this VS Code with me
Yeah,
so that I can
yeah. Let's do that. I'm just
demonstrate
going
some
to
things?
stop the sharing for just a little bit, so we don't uh, accidentally share
You can
the
just go ahead and
token.
share it in the private chat.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
private chat in Restream.
Just did, so you should be able to get that and get that access. I'm going to start
Hopefully,
sharing again, so you
hopefully I
can
have
show
the
us what you
ability to
got.
share. Because I think the last time I tried it, didn't work.
So does it work?
Huh.
Oh, we got a great question in the chat, and I think that sort of helps you out to make a point, because that question is how um, related to that test, how we avoid nesting. So I use the then function. So that's kind of only the half of what I explain on the workshop. The second half is all right. So we have this problem. How do we solve that without going with then, basically creating pyramid of doom. Oh yeah, Kadir asked whether we can share the link for asking a question. Yeah, you can
Oh, the
go.
Slido.
Yeah, the Slido. I'm showing it right now. How are you with the screen sharing? Oh, I can see you joined the collaboration session, so it seems like you're in.
Yeah.
All right.
Now I just need to make sure that I can actually share.
Oh, you're in here, so you want to share your screen? Because I'm already sharing mine. So if you make any changes and save the test, it's going to get rerun. Uh,
Cool.
if you save the test,
It
it's
says
actually going to make rerun this one.
it says that I'm unable to share the screen. Please update system permissions.
Oh, okay. I think you would
But
need to go
actually,
like, close the browser and reopen it.
let's see. But then would I be exiting?
Yeah,
Let's see. Update system. Let's see.
you'd probably have to like close the browser and reopen it. I think.
What is this? Okay. Well, if I can't get it to work now, maybe I'll just. Let's see here.
And you want to share your own screen?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, but it's saying that I need to update
Yeah.
my
But
preferences or something
if you're
security related.
already in the repository here, you're basically connecting to my computer,
Oh yeah.
sharing the screen.
Oh
So
okay.
if
I
you
see what you're
save the
saying. Oh yeah,
code,
that's smart.
it's going
Yeah.
to rerun. Otherwise, if you would
So it
want to share your
does it
screen,
not
you'd
do it in
probably have
real does it not do it in real time? Because that's kind of what I was hoping
it.
to
It
demo here.
does do it in real time.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right, cool. Then I'll
I can
I'll do
even
that
see
rather
your
than share my
cursor
screen. That's
moving
perfect.
around.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. All right. I guess I didn't think about that. So a couple things that I wanted to point out is, and I actually thought you're gonna do this too. Is if I do something like const and then move this up. Well, yeah, I do like const. Well, let's see. How would I want to do that? Because this is going to return the board ID. So if I did like const um, well, body, let's just say
Mhm.
const body equals, and then it's this, like that.
Oh yeah.
That I think is a common misunderstanding as well, because Cypress doesn't work that way. Um, it won't necessarily work this way. It could. I've seen it sometimes work, um, but what Cypress is doing here is it's like, okay, let's just try it, right? So if you do console dot log um, body, let's just see what it does, right?
Yeah, let
So if I
me.
save that, it will.
It's going to run code on my computer. So yeah, you can see that it's returning this chainer function with
Yep.
uh, with the chainer ID and everything. So it's not returning what people might expect, like the value of that board ID. Even if I had a return statement over here in the like return uh, board ID or even body ID, that would not work. It would still it still returns the chainer thing.
Right. Yeah, and that's the same if you do that with a promise. Outside of the Cypress context, if you were to do that with a promise, you'd get the same thing.
Yeah.
If you did body equals some kind of yeah, request, and there's libraries that will return a promise. Um, make a request and return a promise. It's going to be the same. It's going to be the same kind of thing there. Um, Another thing that I wanted to point out. So let me just undo all that. So going back to here. So let's just say you wanted to have access to something within here. One thing that you can do is alias if you need it, if you need access to it later.
Yep.
So if say you were to return um, body.id, right? Return
Hmm.
body.id. You could do as board ID. And then later you can actually have access to it two ways. Outside of like in the next test, you can, like, if you had a test after, sorry, like if this was in a before each and you wanted access to it later, because I don't know
Yeah.
if you can access it through this
No,
right
no, you
after it,
can't.
because that would be, because if I did a console, that would be synchronous, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so what
Even
you
if
can
you
do
use
is
that
site.
on, even if you use that on line 20, with like a board ID would be assigned to the this board ID body ID, I guess, or something like that. Even then, you would it wouldn't work.
Right, right. So I often use this in a before each, where if I a lot of times what I'll do is I'll get some preliminary information, or I'll set up state, and then I will do this as, and then in in the test that's after that before each, I'll actually add that access that. But you can also access it in with sci.get. So if I do console.log board ID, you'll see that you actually are able to get that, and it ends up being this board ID.
Yeah.
Did that actually work?
I think so. Sorry, I got distracted for a moment. Did you save the test already?
I thought I did, yeah.
So let me. Request has failed on API lists. Bad request. We are not. We don't have the
Oh, because we're not
body.
specifying that body ID.
Oh yeah, that's basically failing on this part, right? Because
Oh,
we're
okay,
still
gotcha.
using the board ID thing. And sorry, I closed the console, which you actually wanted to see. So let me open it. And here it is, number 10, line 17. That's over here. So yeah, now you're
Perfect.
sharing the board ID.
Yep. So why would you want to use this? Well, um, let's just say that you needed access to this even within the same block, way further down.
Yeah.
Say you have a bunch of other code, then you can grab this and with sci.get and use it, or in another test um, through under this. So like this dot board ID, you would have access to that um, later. Another thing that I'll see folks doing is actually trying to access do something like this in a dot then,
Hmm.
when you can actually replace that with its. And its is just another way of saying I want to get this particular
Yeah.
like
This
what the path in
particular
the object,
property.
right?
Yeah,
This
yeah, yeah.
key. Yeah, property. Thank you. Yeah. So it's property, right? So then I would say body um, dot ID, and then I can actually eliminate all of that. So now I have
Yeah.
the board ID right there
I
without
really
having to do
like
any kind of dot then.
this syntax. Like, just get the thing you need from there.
Much easier to read. And
Yeah.
sometimes you'll have a dot then, like this and some other stuff underneath it. But rather than grabbing the body ID within this, you can simplify it by just doing the its first. That way you know exactly what you're working with.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. And then the other thing, which kind of gets to the sort of chaining piece that I'll often see, is let's see, how can I want to kind of clean this up a little bit. So let's just say that with this request, you want to make some other request. And I'm not familiar with your API from your
Yeah. The you can
workshop, but
Yeah, you can use the lists, right? So the structure is like this. So you have a board, and then inside the board you have a list. So if you want to create a list, you need to have the board ID, basically assigning that list to a board. And then we can
mm-hmm.
go even like one level lower, where you would have a card, and that card needs to have a list ID inside it. So it needs to be assigned to a list, and it also needs to have a board ID because it's a part of the whole board. So that's how
Yeah.
the API works in general.
Yeah.
So I think we can move those lines, those 17 to 20, inside your then function. I guess you're sort of heading that way, right? If I'm assuming
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah. So let's actually use, let's see. So this would be new board, and then it's um, body.id. Oops. Body.id. And then we have board ID. And then just by doing that, then you don't even need to specify that
Yeah.
there because it's implied. And then let's see. So you're posting to boards, and then you're posting to lists, and then you get, let's see, what does this respond with? Does this respond with a list with
It
the
responds
lists?
with the object that you created. So you create a new list, and then it will give you back some information like the list ID and what's the name of the list and what's the. I think there are some more attributes inside there.
Cool. So then let's do sci.get list,
I think you need
and
an at,
then
right? Symbol.
oh
At,
right,
yes.
yep. Thank you for catching that.
Yeah.
Uh, and then let's do dot debug.
Oh, okay. I'm not using that one. I'm
We can
interested
sh-
in what's
we can
happening here.
show how that one works too. Um, I mean, this right here is really the same as just chaining it to this, but that's okay. Because this returns the list and this returns the list. So no matter where we chain that debug, whether it's here or on
Hmm.
this, it'll still return the same thing. So now I guess I have to save it, right? Did I
Yep.
save it?
Now
And
you have
then what
saved
did we
it.
get here? Cool. So now we have the subject. So you can go into console and then just type subject. Oh, current subject. It already has it there.
We already, yeah.
So debug info. So command name is get, and then the arguments is list, and then this is the current subject. So the current subject is this list. So what that sci.get returns is what we're looking at here is the current subject.
Hmm.
So, um, so now that we have a board and a list, what can we do with that?
We can, I
What
mean,
should
we
we
can
do?
go even further. We can create a new card. So that would be sort of the same API as we have in line 11 to 14. But besides board ID, you would also need to include list ID.
Okay.
So let me walk you through that. So I can actually continue with this code. So
Yeah.
basically, I would go list ID, but I guess I would use the body ID again to just get to the body ID, because this is going to return again body, and it's going to have an ID. So also every list you create, it's going to have its unique ID. So
Uh,
here I'm taking that out of the list. We're aliasing it, and now we are getting it, and just do list ID, and so that's kind of elegant way. So yeah, now when I save this, did I save it? Oh, we have the debugger running, so I guess I need to save that again. I guess I forgot something. You need to provide board ID in request body. Oh, okay. So now we're in a funny situation because
mm,
we got sort of one level deeper, and we're using the board ID, but that's inside this then. So this
yep.
gets a little bit more complicated. So we cannot choose the approach with the get list, but we can use that this function that keyword that you mentioned, and can I
Mm-hmm.
actually take over because this is
Yeah.
sort of
Do it.
this is an interesting part. Like if you're doing API testing at any point, you might get into a situation where you need to sort of create this whole chain of API calls, and each one is taking data from the previous one or even previous two. So this would be a situation right over here, right? So we create the API boards, and then we need a body, we need an ID from that. So we can use it in API list and pass it on here. And then we go one level further. Oh, I forgot to change this. That was supposed to be cards. I'm still going to fail with the same error. Uh, but yeah, then we go to API cards, and we're going to use that list ID, but we're also going to need that board ID, which is way over here. And we cannot really reach to that because we didn't assign an alias. And even if we did, we wouldn't, I don't think we would be able to get like both aliases over here. So how to solve that?
Actually, you could. I don't
We
know if
did
this
it.
is what you're after, but one thing that you could do that I've done before is I'll actually. So remember when you're looking at chains like this, right? Um, each thing that each child command receives the subject or what the
Yeah.
previous command returns,
Yeah.
right? And if you go to what its returns, it actually returns the thing, well, in this case, the board ID. Also, as does the same thing. So you can actually do as board ID, and that will both alias it and pass it forward to the next thing. Is that where you were
Uh,
after? Like, were you trying to access this?
oh yeah, yeah. I actually was. So now we have those aliases. We have the board ID. We have the list with the list ID. I guess should be the proper naming here. List ID. But what do we do now? We need to we are inside this then function, and we need both the board ID and list ID. And list ID we are provided with inside the then function, but the board ID
Yeah.
is uh, is not provided with this then function, and I'm assuming that we're not able to pass it inside the get command.
So can we
Or can we?
do? Well, let's see. What if we did? Um, what if we did? Because with arrow functions, the this is different. The this is represented differently in arrow functions. So we'd have to make this like a function,
Hmm.
um, and then list ID. This is actually something that I haven't tried before, because usually it's in another later block in another hook or something like
Yeah,
that. But let's just see if we have access to it here. This dot board ID. And let's just see if that works.
oh, it seems like it
We
does.
good?
We
Awesome.
are good.
Cool.
Oh, okay, that's really nice, nice way of doing that. So now that the test
Now
is
what is
passing.
this? So here's a so in case it got missed, doing it this way is the same as saying is taking this. Like we could take this, right? We could move this up and put it in here, so that in this dot
Yeah,
then, so that we're in the context of board ID, right?
yeah,
We wouldn't, yeah, and then we'd do, yeah, and then we wouldn't need to access
the
this dot
board.
board
Yeah,
ID in
we
there,
would just have the board
right?
ID.
Right. So
Yeah,
you could do it that way, but what this does is this flattens things out a little bit so that you don't have
yeah.
to do that.
I mean, I still think this is kind of messy. So I want to go back to the solution that I would do, and you kind of mentioned that already. So Cypress test will execute in these blocks. So I always like to think about those blocks that get executed. So it is one of the blocks that is basically executed as a whole. Then everything inside the then function, again, that's something that's executed as a whole. And also, if you have a before each function, then that is executed as a whole as well. So what that means is that, let's actually go with function, because we want to use this keywords, and this doesn't work inside arrow functions. So how I would rewrite this whole mess would be, if the goal is just to create a card, right? So let's rename this test to creating a new card via API. So in order to create my card, that's over here, I need the board ID and the list ID, and I get those from previous requests. So what I would do
Yep.
is I would take this code over here and create my board, right? So that's where that goes. And I'm going to alias it with the board ID. Now, the second thing I want to do is to take this CY request part and again give it an alias. But what I would do is I would create another before each, because they get stacked up. So what I do, I'd paste it in here. I guess I have one extra bracket over here. And of course, board ID is going to be this board ID. So that's going to so this board ID is going to reference this alias. So every time, I don't think we mentioned that, every time we create an alias, it sort of creates this context variable, this Mocha context variable, which can be referenced by this and the name of the variable, so board ID. So this and this is the
Mm-hmm.
same, right? And
Yep.
then finally, I get to my final request, the one that I want to do,
Creating a
one that
card.
is
Yeah.
mentioned in the name of that test is that I want to create a new card via API. I'm going to do this list ID again, referencing this alias over here. And now I think it's pretty clean and sort of tells the whole story. So I have create my board, create my list, and then go ahead and create my card. So when I now save
Mm-hmm.
it, you'll see that that it works and it creates the card. And I think it plays really nicely with the whole system of creating the test like this uh, arrange, act, assert. So
Yeah.
this is my arrange phase. In my before each hooks or before hooks, this could be before hooks as well because we just have one test. Um, so in the before blocks, I'm preparing my test. And I just
Yep.
create as many before blocks as I need. I basically just need two because I'm not using that a lot of data. But yeah, this is my preparation phase. This is where I prepare my data, and here is where I act on the data that I have prepared. I'm of course not
Mm-hmm.
doing any assertions, so there's no assert phase. But I think this
Yeah.
I like this way. It feels elegant to me.
Cool. One thing that's actually kind of hidden that I think some people miss is that you can actually add a title to this.
Yeah,
So you can say create board. You can say create board and here too. It's not required, but
yeah.
create list.
But it's
But
kind of
I think that
sad it
really
doesn't
helps
show
because
up.
then you kind of know what's actually happening here. What was that?
It's kind of sad that it doesn't show up in the Cypress runner though. Like don't
Oh
see that.
yeah, I know. I know. That was actually a request that I had while I was working at Cypress is like,
Yeah.
can we do that? But they not enough people are care about it. So they have other things they're working on, but yeah,
Don't worry,
create
Mike.
board, create
Once
list.
this podcast gets big and we're going to be influencers, we are going to influence
That's right.
Cyprus.
That's right.
Just going to organize a
That's
mob
right.
attack to just give us the before each hook names
That's right. Give us what we want or else. I
or
think
else.
you can
Yeah.
actually not
Yeah.
that
The
you
first one can be
if you
an
know
arrow function. Yeah.
right? Yeah, that should work. Cool. Awesome.
All right.
Looks
So
great.
we kind of described the whole alias and everything. Uh, and yeah, so we kind of arrived at the goal of this topic. So we've been
Awesome.
going on for like almost hour and a half. No, hour 20. So is there a topic we want to open, or should we wrap things up?
I think we need to
What
wrap
do you
things
think?
up for us and our audience because otherwise once we open a new can of worms, we'll be here for another
Yeah,
hour
we'll probably
knowing
go for
knowing
another
us
half hour.
because that's what happens when we're just like talking, without a podcast. So,
Yeah, but honestly, I liked that we spent quite a lot of time on code and collaborating
yeah.
inside the code. I think we need to do more of that and
Yeah.
do our content more around the VS Code editor and playing with that.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah,
That's what's fun for me anyway. I think it's more fun than just chatting with my big head and the video.
and yeah, anyone watching can also like request whatever you would like to learn about. And if you like this kind of content, if it was useful for you, if you learned something new about variables and all of these scopes and it blocks and before each blocks and everything. That would be a great feedback for us, and hopefully it will be useful. Oh, we already got one. Do this more often, please. So
All
yeah,
right.
we'll try our best to do this more often and more useful. And yeah, I guess we can then wrap things up. Any last words from you, Mike?
I would say go to that Slido code review. Um, where's that overlay? Can you put that up?
Yeah, it's here.
Yep.
I've been sort of turning it on and off, and etc. So
Yeah. So if you go to slido.com, it'll ask you for the, what is it called? Like the ID or whatever. And you can put that in. This is we're not gonna close this Slido, so it's gonna
yep.
remain open. And so if you have questions, if you're watching this on the recording, go ahead, go to that Slido, ask questions there. Um, if you think of something later, or maybe you just didn't want to chime in on the chat, go ahead and just add that to the Slido. And when you go into the Slido, read through the questions too. And if there's anything that you especially want to have us answer, give it a thumbs up. I don't know if it's a +1 thumbs up, whatever, but upvote it so that we know what you guys care about, what you want us to talk about. And if we have an opportunity to do, this is the code review podcast, so we can review your code, and you can submit it through the Discord, or when we have topics, we'll do these. We'll kind of review our own code, so to speak, example code we'll review. But yeah, this was
Yeah, I
fun.
think I think you wrapped things up nicely. Basically, I have nothing to add. Just to repeat, yeah, you can
Cool.
go to Slido and enter the code review to ask a question. You can jump into Discord, as it was mentioned, and there's a code review channel where we can review the code and then use it in the code review as well. Or if there's any topic you're interested in, just let us know either on Twitter, LinkedIn, Discord, wherever we are moving around. We're all around the place, so you won't miss us. All
Cool.
right then. Thanks again for watching, and see you everyone next time. Bye bye,
See ya.
everyone. See you.